Hey, we're back. This time we're going to be taking a look at Lazer Ryderz from Greater Than Games. They sent me this one to do a review on. It's a pretty awesome game. I love the retro style of the box. It's even got the weathering on the edges to make it look like it's from the 80s and the holographic foil on there. I don't know if the camera will pick that up, but... And they're made to look like VHS tapes. But it's a really interesting, quick game. Kind of a cross between a maneuvering game as well as a racing type thing. And we'll get right in and take a look. So the guys at Greater Than Games went through a lot to make this really feel nostalgic and have that 80s look and feel to it. As I mentioned, it looks like a VHS box set. It's actually slightly bigger. We have our rules here, and the title on it sideways like this makes it look like it folds out, but it's actually a book that goes this way. I'm not sure why they did that, but does an okay job of explaining everything. They cover everything you need to know to play in there. The game is more of a fun, like filler type thing, so there's a couple things that are kind of iffy. We'll get to that when we get to the templates and stuff, where people have had complaints about it, where it's not very accurate, or it's hard. It's easy to have debates on how things should be or where things should end up. But I mean, the game's meant to be light and fun. You play it with your friends and don't worry too much about winning, just worry more about having fun, I say. So inside the box, each of the characters has a tray like this. There's the Phantom Cosmonaut, Galactic Wave Rider, Super Sheriff, and Laser Shark. And they're just slightly bigger than a standard VHS box. I do like the way they look, though. They have a description of the characters on the back. And my only complaint is that they used a inside tray that slides out instead of like the clamshell cases like the Disney classic type movies came in. They would have been better for what these are for, because as it is, there's a chance that some of your parts might slide out of here, especially if you store the game up on its end like it's meant to. Inside, you can see some of these have already shifted in here. There's a nice little layout in here. I should take out a couple of the extra pieces, where everything fits in its little place nicely. And they could have used a small tab or something on the top to kind of snap these in place so they don't shift when you store it vertically. But for what it is, it works perfectly fine. Each player is going to get one of these trays. In it is going to be your character. This one's Laser Shark. I'm not going to open every single one. You have all your laser templates in here, some of the portals to score, your launch pad, and there's some other odds and ends in there as well. One of them has the die in there. And then each one has a turn order marker. And one of them has the tiebreaker token as well. So each player is going to get one of these characters standees. And they do have a base that snaps on there. And you have a counter that goes on here to keep track of what gear you're in. They have this cool holographic foil. Doesn't show up too well on camera, but it's a neat little thing on the laser tiles. I think it's a bit too much on the character tiles as well. Maybe they could have done the bottom half or around the scores. I don't think they needed to do the entire thing, but it is what it is. The bases to these could be slightly larger as well. There are these tiny little bases that go on there. And they stand up on their own, but they could have been slightly larger, especially if you're going to use these to mark your progress at the end of your templates and slide these along. I realize they made them so that they'll fit on the template. Maybe that was their intention, but would have been nice to see them with a slightly bigger base. I know some people already went out and did that. And then there's your gear marker that you use to mark first, second, third, fourth, or fifth gear to keep track of your speed. I'll set these aside and we'll go through each thing that's in the single tray here. So as I said, we have our turn order marker. There's of course 1 through 4 of those, as well as the tiebreaker. You have your launch point. At the beginning of the game, you're going to place this on your table edge, and then you can launch off of one of these markers here. If you wreck, this picks up with the rest of your stuff and you get to start over. Each box has 1 neutral portal in it, like that. You're going to have 1 of those for each player in the game out on the field to start with. Your goal is to actually make your laser pass through these portals like this, and it'll flip to your color. If you were off to the side like that, doesn't count as going through. You got to be able to see the portal marker on both sides. And there's a few special rules that go with that too, as long as pushing it. If you don't go through it, like if you're like this, it'll actually bump it to the outside like so. And a lot of little things like that. If you do score, it slides to the end unless it's locked. If there's two different people's markers touching it and so on. But the rules are pretty straightforward about how those work. And for the most part, pretty good at explaining it. Each player is going to get 3 of these scored portals in their color. Once you have one of your lasers passes over these, you're going to replace it with one of your color, and then these get tossed back out on the field. So the longer the game progresses, the more of these that are out there. These, you need to score 3 of them in order to win. However, if they're out there and somebody else drives over them, they can flip them to their color and replace them as well. So the longer the game goes, the more of these get spread throughout the map, and the easier it is to hit them and to score. For an advanced rule to kind of add a little more depth to the game once you're familiar with it, they have these special ability tokens. There's one for each character. They have the character's picture on one side and a special ability on the back. These can be used once per game. When they get used, you flip them over. If somebody runs over one of your previously scored portals and flips it to their color, you flip this back over and you can use it again. So you want to kind of hang on to them until later in the game, but not so long that somebody flips one of those and you basically wasted a chance to get it back. Each one of the characters has a unique ability, and they kind of make them all different in some way. And finally, we have our templates here. They come in a couple different shapes. We have our straights, which start with the 5s, and they go down. There's 4s. 3s, 2s, and 1s. And you can kind of see there the difference in the lengths of them from the 1 all the way up to the 5. Those are your straights. You also have these slight turns, or banks as we call them in attack wing, and those go from 1 to 4. And then there's these hard turns that go 1 to 3. And just for a comparison there, you can see the difference between a 3 bank and a 3 hard turn. And then one random box is also going to contain the die, and this has normal 6-sided die, except the 6 is replaced with that. It has this cool like gem sparkle to it too. But whenever you attempt to do a turn, you're going to roll this die, and you need to roll above the gear that you're in. So if you roll below the gear, you won't be able to perform the turn. So say you're going 4 and you want to do that 4 bank. If you roll a 5 or a 6, you're going to fail that test and you're going to have to go a 4 straight instead of bank. If you make the test, you do the turn as normal. If you roll the 6, which is the spin out, you're going to perform the maneuver you wanted, but then you're going to lose all your speed and spin out and go all the way back down to first gear. The other interesting thing about the game is that you have a limited number of these. You have 2 of every template, and as you're going along, you have to keep that in mind. You can't reuse ones you don't have. So if you're going along and you want to pull a 3 tight turn, and then all of a sudden you realize, I don't have any 3 tight turns left, you're stuck with that maneuver, so you have to go to the 3 light turn. And if you're out of those, then you go to the 2 hard turn. If you're out of those, you go to the 2 light turn, and so on. If you still don't have one, then you go back and you'll start taking apart your line until you find the one that you need in order to progress. The game kind of reminds me of Tron in a way, as you're moving about the board. Basically, you're going to have a bunch of these out there. I only have a couple out there just for this example. And as you play, you're going to be putting out your templates for the gear that you're in, trying to move towards. So we'll put it there. Have our guy up here. Oops. That's what I was saying about him needing bigger bases. Meanwhile, our opponents are going to be doing the same type of thing over here. And you can put the your character tokens here on the end of the lasers. I think it looks cooler that way, but at the same time, they tend to tip over and things, so you can just as easily keep these in front of you and just use the laser itself to represent you. So the idea is to try to guess what kind of maneuver you would need to either score either of these. We're too close to this one. That one we might be able to do with a hard 3 or maybe a light 4 turn. So in our case, we were in 4th gear here. We're going to pick for our turn. We're going to downshift to 3rd. Try our roll, which we failed, but say we passed it just for the sake of this. Then we're going to take our 3 and we're going to try to make our turn here. Now this is one problem the game has. As you're putting these on, these tend to shift and move, so you really have to hold one in place to put the other one on to keep it shifting as little as possible. If you're playing with a good group of friends, I don't think anybody's going to argue too much, but I can see where that would be a point of contention for people who playing at a store with people they're not familiar with. So that's one of my little pet peeves about the game, but honestly it's not that big of a deal. And then throughout the course of the game, you're going to be building more and more of these. We're going to go on here. And he'll go off that way. At the same time, this other player is going to be doing the same thing. We'll go down here just because. So here they were going to score for this prism here, and their next maneuver that they chose isn't going to work to get out of the way. It touches our line here. So what that's going to do is that's actually going to wipe them out. In this case, they did score though because they went over the prism, but then they're going to wreck. So that's going to take them off the board. They pick up everything from the point of impact. Well, on their line, they're going to pick up everything all the way back to their starting platform. And then on their following turn, they're going to be able to replace this by closing their eyes and placing it somewhere along their table edge, picking a new gear, and they'll be back on their way. On this player, you're going to take the point of impact and every piece before that off the board. You can't take the piece off that they're still connected to. So that the very final one where our marker is up here just off camera, if they had hit up here or even hit that one, you're going to take everything from that point back, but you will not take that front one. And this is good for the people who got ran into because now we have all these templates we can use again. And it's good for the other players because now it opens up this part of the board. And where this game really shines is when you have all 4 players and you have lines and lasers going every which way, and it just looks really cool on the table to see it all, and it's a mess, and you're trying to avoid those lines, trying to cut people off to force them to run into your lines and things like that. Meanwhile, you're racing to be the one to score the prisms. Now, one minor complaint I did have about the game, and I kind of touched it real quickly earlier, is that the pieces don't fit together perfectly well. The way they're cut, there's a little bit of play in them. So when you put them together, you kind of have to hold one in place. I'm too close in. You have to hold one in place and push the other up against it, and to make sure they fit. But there's a little bit of wiggle room, and it doesn't seem like much. But after you get 2 or 3 pieces chained together, we did this one here and this one here. If you're off a little bit down here, and then this one's a little off up here, and then this one's a little off. So you could say your marker right now ends here, but now if we were to tighten these up a little bit, and I moved the die there, but you get the idea. You straighten these out, and suddenly that's in a completely different place. And over the course of a game, that can really make a big difference. So it's not a game you want to play with somebody who's a very strict rules lawyer or someone who's very competitive, because things like this are going to aggravate them. Again, the other rule is the nudging. If you ran over one of these and you didn't score, it has to be slid out. It's supposed to be one laser piece width away from the track. There's a rule where after you score one of these, you take these neutral ones and you sit back on the edge of the table and they have to be tossed back out into play. Things like that. There's a lot of kind of iffy rules that can really upset players who are die-hard, by-the-book, competitive players. So keep that in mind. You're going to want to play with more friendly, more casual players, I think. But it is a lot of fun. So here's a look at the really cool tray inserts that come in the boxes. And they are set up really cool and they're very functional. I just wish they had some sort of tab or something, a notch, to hold each row in place. As long as you keep your case, as long as you keep it stored flat, everything fits back in there perfectly. But you can put these in, and everything stores in there nice and neat. But when you stand these up on end, the lower ones tend to shift out because there's nothing really holding them in, and then the whole thing kind of slides down and they don't fit in the box quite right. The other kind of annoying thing is that you have to take apart your character each time. The base comes off, the marker comes off, and the marker has its own little slot here, and the base has its own little slot here. And I worry that taking these apart and putting them together is going to wear the small piece of material here on either side that holds those in place, as well as the bottom where the base slides on. Eventually, over time, that's going to get a lot of wear from going on and off. The storage solution is kind of cool, though. There's a spot for everything. Minor inconvenience that the neutral portals you need for each player, there's one in each player box. So you're going to have to open every box every time anyway to get those out. As well as the die being randomly in one of the boxes. So you're going to have to dig that out each time. Really wouldn't have been that much harder for them to put a single die in each box. And that way you don't have to pass it around either. And the other one is the turn markers, which again are spread one in each box. So depending on the number of players you have, you're going to have to fish around to dig those out. So you can see all the templates fit back in there nice. You put your player marker in here, and there really isn't a spot for the character. They just kind of sit on top. And then everything slides back into the box. Overall, I really like the game. I like the thematic aspect of it. It looks cool on the table, especially with all those holographic pieces. The presentation of the display boxes and the box itself looking that 80s VHS feel are great. The advertising and things they did for it were old flickery VHS style videos, which were kind of neat. And everything looks great when you're playing. It's a lot of fun to play with the right people. As I said, it can't be anybody who's too serious because of the minor things like the pieces shifting. I do recommend that you play on some sort of play mat. We have a nice felt one that I use for my attack wing videos. Looks like space, and it keeps the pieces from shifting too much. But you're going to be moving the portals when people score. They're being pulled out from underneath. People are moving other templates around. Things are going to get bumped and nudged, and it's just part of the game you're going to have to deal with. A few minor things, like I said, I wish they were a clamshell type thing and didn't have this gap at the bottom. So when you did them vertical, the pieces don't shift and possibly fall out. And slightly bigger bases on the characters so they didn't tip over. I also worry, as cool as they look, the foiling on these pieces is a layer that's put on top. And I worry about that peeling along the edges. I have a couple pieces somewhere. It's usually towards the tips because these get bumped a lot. Very small one going right there. It's hard to get on the camera. But they started to peel already. And I worry about the longevity of the foil coating on there. If that peels off, we'll have to see how that works and how it holds up over time. But it does look great. And the other one is, as I pointed out, the edges of the player tokens on either side of this, because you're going to be sliding that token back and forth all the time. You kind of have to take it out to put it back in the boxes for storage. So you're taking it out and putting it on. And I worry that these may buckle after repeated use. So we'll have to see how that holds up as well. Other than that, though, I have no real complaints about the game. It was a lot of fun. We've played it with 2 people a couple times. We played it with 3 once. I still have yet to play with 4, but I find the more people, the more fun, because things just turn into chaos as you get those laser lines going every which way. And if you're a fan of the Tron light bikes, it's very reminiscent of that, except there's no 90-degree turns in there. But you have lines going every which way, crisscrossing, and you're trying to weave through. And if you hit and you wreck, it's not that big of a deal. You basically lose that turn. You pick up your stuff. You're ready to go the next turn. So there's no real penalties. And sometimes crashing is actually good because you can take out somebody's line that's in your way. You crash into them. It lets you reset back on your table edge. It clears out a path for you. You got to be careful, though, because it also clears out a path for somebody else who can swoop in and take something that you were looking to take in the first place. Really fun, really thematic game. I love the presentation. I love pretty much everything about it. Just don't take it too seriously, and you'll have a lot of fun with it. Anyway, that's going to wrap it up for our look at Lazer Ryderz from Greater Than Games. As always, thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.